Welcome to the WordPress Photography Podcast, the podcast for photographers who want to learn how to get the most out of WordPress to grow their photography business. You don't need to be a geek to understand WordPress. Settle back and listen as we show you how. Now, here's your host, Scott Wyden-Kivowitz.
Welcome to episode 125. My name is Scott Wyden-Kivowitz, and I'm joined by my guest, BP Miller. BP is a multi-award-winning photographer, photojournalist, and speaker. His work has been seen in the Philadelphia Inquirer, Philadelphia Daily News, Rolling Stone, New York Times, and countless other publications. In 2021, his work done during the early part of the global pandemic was curated by the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History. He's an active volunteer in photojournalism industry and served as the former Mid-Atlantic chair of the National Press Photographers Association, as well as the board member of the North Short Course in Photojournalism and ASMP Philadelphia. When he is not speaking at professional conferences about photography, he spends his free time volunteering, biking, and supporting local businesses outside his home in suburban Philadelphia with his wife, Michele, and their dog, Tucker. What kind of dog is Tucker?
Tucker is a schnauzer, and he is all of 7 months old.
Oh, that's cute.
at the moment, yeah.
So welcome, BP. Welcome to the WordPress Photography Show. How you doing?
Thanks, Scott. Good, man. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm doing well. Fully vaccinated.
Fully vaccinated, which is a good. As a matter of fact, today is exactly 2 weeks since my second shot, so my immune system is back up to normal, and I'm here for the foreseeable future,
nice.
Hopefully. So nice to be on that side of the line for sure.
So obviously we're recording this before this actually goes live on the air, but Friday will be my 2 week as well. So looks like
congratulations. Well. Now, let me ask you, did you have any side effects at all? Did you have Pfizer?
I had Pfizer.
And then did you have any side as did we? Did you have any side effects
for the second one? I did. Yeah. I got home with a minor headache, and then I woke up the next morning with still the headache, freezing cold, but no fever at all. My spine felt like I was beat up, just my spine. And then I was very tired. I actually took a nap, which I never do. And the injection point felt like somebody took a knife and slashed me. So I had a bunch of really weird side effects. I know some were kind of common, but
yeah, we didn't have either. My wife and I both had Pfizer. First shot, dead arm, which
right.
Look, anybody that's been in the military, I was in the Army, a lifetime ago, and when you first go into basic, they hit you like with 8 shots in each arm. So I was expecting the dead arm at a bare minimum, but even with the second shot, we had the dead arm again. We both had a dull headache for about a day, and that was it. Yeah. I've had friends that have gotten horribly ill. I've got friends that haven't had any side effects from either shot. So it a lot of it comes down to genetics and chemistry, and if you had COVID, apparently if you've had it, your body will react a little more, will have a more harsh effect to it.
Interesting.
Apparently, but I guess we didn't have it. Hopefully.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure. We didn't show any symptoms. So
Right. Yeah, I don't know. I didn't have it. I was around people who had it at one point, but I got tested for antibodies and it was negative after that. So I don't know, but it is what it is.
Here we are.
Here we are
now on the other side.
And you know what? I keep saying that if it's a day I feel like utter crappiness, I'll take that over the potential lethal alternatives. So
I felt worse after day-long pressers and stuff like that. Coming home, I'm exhausted. My legs hurt. My back hurt. Nothing. Like, this was nothing. I was like, oh God, I was expecting the worst, right. and it was fine. So.
Okay, so let's dive into this. This is another pivot and shift episode, and obviously we're already talking about why we're talking about pivoting and shifting. But we're here to talk about the pandemic and ways that you've had to adjust. As everybody heard in the intro, you've had some good things come out of this. I mean, as much as you could say a good thing in a global pandemic, but so we're gonna dive deeper into this this whole thing. But if you can give the listeners, the viewers, a brief summary of what your photography business was like before this.
Well, I mean, so as most photographers and photojournalists anymore, I mean, you have to do a little bit of everything in order to survive. You can't, unless you're in an active newsroom, and even then, that's kind of not the case for most freelancers anymore. You're doing a little bit of everything. So we were doing a ton of event work, and not just weddings. Like I actually hate doing weddings. I do a couple, 3 a year, and that's about it. But we do a ton of corporate conferences, medical conferences. We cover. We're the photographers for a number of different radio stations here in Philadelphia, so we would go and cover these major events. We photograph the largest single food drive in America every year, right after Thanksgiving. It looked a lot different this year. So all of that work that we normally have, I never really considered ourselves event-based photographer. But once everything shut down and this conference got canceled and that got, I'm like, oh my God, like we really do have a lot of our eggs in a single basket. Pardon me. And it never felt like that. So then all of a sudden I'm like, well, now what the hell are we going to do? And there was that, period of time where I really wasn't sure. It's, you learn to overcome and adapt and try and figure things out. There is a saving grace to this, and I know it's going to sound worse than I mean it to, but it wasn't just me. It was everybody. It wasn't just something we did from a business standpoint. I was in the same basket as everybody else. And, that was the one for me. It was kind of like, all right, it was almost a comforting feeling just to know that I'm like, all right, I'm in this with everybody else. It's not just us, or it's not just a locale, it's the entire globe.
Right. Yeah, and it is kind of funny when like you while you're in the thick of things in your business, and you're like, yeah, I do this, I do this, I do this, and when it comes down to it, sometimes you are just one genre, right? Like
it's multiple genres, but it's all the same side of the coin,
right?
And you just like, when I think about event photography, I'm like, oh, that's weddings and bar bat mitzvahs, or concert photography or whatever. You don't take into consideration, conferences are an event, even though like they're this huge multi-day event that you're just constantly running and gunning and doing all this stuff. You don't think about how much of that income is actually event-based.
Right.
And it wasn't until we lost it where I'm like, oh God, all right, all these years when I speak and all that, I say, don't put all your eggs in one basket. And apparently they were there. I just didn't notice.
Yeah.
So it was a wake up. It was definitely a wake up call. I can tell you that much.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's interesting how life works sometimes.
Yeah.
So
not just when you're getting covered. We had come off 2019 was the best year we've had since we've been in business. And there is nothing like a global pandemic to put a foot squarely up your ass to remind you, yeah, this can come and go at any time.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna need you to focus a little bit and try and figure things out.
So obviously your business has been impacted by these events basically just not happening, right?
Yes.
I know, like, so I have a friend who's a photographer for a transit company, and he does a lot of the press photos and setup and whatnot for events for not only the transit company but also the state governor. And I know that things basically shut down for a little bit, and then as the state started figuring everything out, they started redoing events, but now everybody's masked and they more distant and stuff. So I'm assuming that besides from events shutting down, there's been other impacts to your business that maybe they're starting to turn around now, but
slowly.
Yeah. So what else was impacted besides from events going away?
Well, I mean, the events was the biggest thing initially, and then when the pandemic hit in March, and here outside of Philadelphia, we shut down. I want to say like the 14th or the 15th, something like that. My wife and I looked at the business numbers and said, okay, like we can afford to continue rent until the end of the year, and if we have to put our own money in, we will. When December rolls around, we're going to have to make a decision on whether or not we're going to keep the studio space, because even through 21, we're really not going to need the studio space. Like, while headshots are coming back, people are more comfortable with it in their own homes or on location. And obviously with the advancements in lighting and everything else over the last 10 years, it's so easy to set up in the middle of a field or in a parking lot or whatever and really make these dramatic portraits. but we ended up shutting down our studio in December just because at that point I'm like, we moved we moved during the pandemic. We had and I'm personally, we moved out of the town that we had been in for 8 years and moved to a different area. We had decided to do this last January and put our house up on the market March 7th. And then everything shut down a week later. So we may have eventually shut down that particular studio, but we would have just opened up in the town that we moved to. We just shut it down. So for right now, we're working out of our home. I mean, luckily we've got tall ceilings and I can do headshots here. I can, still travel. But yeah, I mean, the biggest thing was, we have 8, other photographers that work for us throughout the year doing either the radio station events or weddings or this event or that event. I felt bad because they're contract, as most people in our industry are. I mean, everyone, is a 1099. So it's one of those situations where like I was trying to figure out if there was a way that I could help them because they're all younger. I'm fairly established in my life. I'm married. I've got a home. A lot of the people that are working for us are 2, 3, 4, 5 years out of college. They're still getting themselves together. And I was just trying to figure out a way to maybe if there was a way to help them too. Unfortunately, there just wasn't. There wasn't any work to do. It was definitely am I allowed to curse a little bit, or do we try to keep this clean?
We try to keep it clean.
Okay, it was a crotch punch. I'll put it. It was definitely. It was just not something that I was expecting, and nobody was. But at the same time, to try and figure out how to pivot off of that, and to try and keep some level of employment with the people that have been there for you for years, proved to be really difficult. It was not an easy situation, and still isn't.
So can you talk about some of the ways that you've adapted to all these changes that you were forced to have to make? I mean, obviously, one of which you just mentioned was building the studio out of your house. But which
and you can see all the stuff behind me in the studio. That hasn't gone up on the walls or gonna wait until we move in.
I mean, for everybody who's watching the video of this, you'll see that I'm in the same boat. I mean, I've always had done it basically in an environment or out of my home, and that's what I'm doing now anyway. So but can you talk about everything else, like any other changes that you've had to make to adapt to everything that's happened?
I let my CPS membership go just for the year. I'm thinking to myself, I'm really not shooting. I can live without CPS for a year. Like, and if I need to go get it cleaned and checked, I'll pay for it. But, you start looking at ways to cut down on overhead. So obviously the biggest was the studios. And then after that, I had a punch list of what we were going to reinvest into this year. So it was like, it's around that time for me to get some new monitors. The ones I have are about 5 years old. I was going to upgrade our camera equipment. I've been shooting with Canon Mark IV, 5D Mark IVs and the R series. And I was going to maybe invest into either one of the 1D series or a couple of the new R5s. That got put on hold. Our advertising campaign that we had set up for this year was yanked. We pulled that back. And then at that point, it was like, all right, well, then how am I going to I will be the first to admit, I am very lucky in a financial sense. My wife and I have done investing over the years, and we weren't, from a financial standpoint, that wasn't as much of a worry. I don't have, a lot of people don't have that. And I'm very lucky in that. My wife is amazing when it comes to that. So she's the one that handles all of it. So I'm very lucky from that standpoint that wasn't an additional weight on me. But at the same time, I'm a photographer. I'm a photojournalist. Like, this is what I do for a living. How the hell do you stay busy when there's no life happening? Like, how do you document life when there's no life? And after a while, you get to the point, like, how many shots do we need of people in masks or empty storefronts or empty streets? And it got depressing. It really did. So, that was, as far as having to make those difficult decisions on things that we had planned for 2020. Again, it was a kick in the crotch. It was not something that was fun to even go through. And I was fine for like the first 6 or 7 months. And by the time October, November rolled around, I got dark. Like, I was in a really dark place because I didn't see a way out of it. I was seriously considering whether or not I wanted to head back into radio, which is what I did before I was a photographer. I mean, I've always been into photography since I was a kid, but professionally, I was in radio. I thought maybe I was going to have to do that. I haven't worked in the corporate world in years. I haven't refreshed a resume in 15, 16 years. So there was a lot of life decisions that I really had to sit there and kind of come to grips with and be like, all right, you know what, 15 years for a photography studio is a pretty decent run in this day and age. You know, the average one lasts about two and a half years. The fact that we had 15, I'm like, all right, it's been a good run. And if it's got to come to an end, it's got to come to an end. And then stuff just changed. And next thing you know, we're okay. So it's, you know, it's almost looking at your own mortality, be it professionally or personally. You know, there was a major shift.
So you did things. You started some different projects,
Yes.
whether it's working with nonprofits or doing nonprofit type things. Can you talk about some of those things you started?
So nonprofits have always been a cornerstone of what we do. We work with a ton of nonprofits. I've been a guest speaker through the Momenta series with Jamie Rose. I've taken some of their, you know, I've audited, for lack of a better term, some of their classes. We do a ton of nonprofit work. So my first thing that I wanted to do, I saw that there was this campaign going around, like 10,000 headshots or something like that,
right.
but it was under one umbrella.
Yeah.
And I was kind of like, I had been thinking about doing that, but I just wanted to do it my way. I didn't want to have to necessarily do it the way somebody else had. So I utilized my media connections here in Philadelphia. I was on the local news and stuff like that, and basically said, look, anybody that has lost their job, that wasn't expecting to lose their job, may have been in the same job for 10 or 15 years, and does not have an updated headshot, come on up to the studio. It's on us. It's free. And we ended up doing not as many as I thought we would have, but we ended up doing like 20 or 25. And if I helped those 20 or 25 people, you know, help to get a new job, then great. And if they didn't, they've got a new head, you know, or if they did and whatever, they have a new headshot at a bare minimum. So we started doing that. We started just offering our time to nonprofits in the area. Just say, look, you know, you guys are hurting, we're hurting. I'm just sitting around twiddling my thumbs. Tell me what you need and I'll come and do it. I've never been a rule follower when it comes to our industry. You know, everyone's like, you don't give away your work for free. I find fault with that. I think that's how you give back. I think if you are lucky enough to get to a point in your career where you're able to give back and give back of your time or your energies or whatever, you do it. That's just putting good karma back out on the world. So we started working with, in the town that we lived previously, which is a town called Phoenixville, Pennsylvania. They had just had this huge revitalization over the last 5-8 years. So all the nonprofits that were in town and all the restaurants that were in town, all my friends that own these businesses, I just started helping them with either taking product shots for their takeout menus or any of that stuff. Again, we were lucky enough that I didn't necessarily have to go out and find a secondary job, but because I was in the position that I was in, I could go and help my friends, and I can help these nonprofits, and I can help them get through.
Right.
It, you know, it gave them something, it gave me something inside, and we were able to kind of at least work a little bit as opposed to worrying about what was to come.
Have you, being that you have a radio background, and you have a deep connection with a lot of the businesses in your area, have you thought about doing a local podcast to potentially bring in some income for yourself, but also help out those businesses in a different way than might have, you know, beyond photography?
We actually did something very similar to that. It was called the 10 Rounds With, and I utilized every one of my connections. I interviewed people in Hollywood. I interviewed local celebrities here in Philadelphia, news personalities, business owners. It didn't get the traction that I was hoping for, but also it's hard to get a podcast out there and to get noticed. Like, it's when I first, I had a radio show that I used to do when I initially got out of radio, and as we were building Chorus up, called The Acoustic Diner. And I would spend like 3 or 4 hours a week cutting the show, putting it together, getting it up on the different platforms. But this was 2005, 2006, where podcasts were just really kind of starting to come up into the public consciousness. Now, I mean, you can't turn without getting, you know, one of the ones that I'm listening to right now is Zach Braff and Donald Faison from Scrubs. They're doing this podcast and they're going episode by episode, you know, talking about the different things,
reacting to their own.
Yeah, which is it's been great to listen to. My wife and I are huge fans of the show, but there's so many of them. How do you get noticed outside of all that? And I mean, I had some fairly big, for Philadelphia, I had some fairly big Philadelphia names. I had a couple bigger names from out in Hollywood of people that I've known for a long time. Just didn't get the traction. So,
Mm.
I think everything through the pandemic has been trial and error. And I think everybody has been throwing so much crap up against the wall to figure out what would stick. Some of the ideas we came up with worked, some of it didn't. And that was one that just didn't, it was nice, but it just didn't really do much.
Mm. Yeah, because I was thinking like there's ways that you could do it that would market the podcast with local businesses and to help the local businesses help the podcast grow from consumers by way of saying, you know, in the initial starting point, say like, "Hey, I want to talk about your business on this new podcast."
A lot of the
Would you?
chambers have been doing that. So a lot of the chambers of commerce
Yeah.
locally have been doing that. One of my good friends, Bill Vidiello, who is VP of something at one of the local banks. I can't remember his new title, but he's been doing this thing called Chamber Chat. And again, there are a lot of those out there. I wanted to start with bigger names to see what kind of traction we got because, if I can't get traction with that, I'm definitely not going to be able to get traction with a more local or hyper local person. We tried it with a number of, I worked probably with like 2 or 3 different nonprofits and did a little bit of that. And it just never really, I think everybody was just really worried about themselves and nobody was necessarily, they were too busy, either binging on Netflix or just trying to figure out what, their next steps were going to be. I think everybody had a different outlook in the last year.
For sure. So when you first submitted to come on and talk about your pivots and shifts, you mentioned something about focusing more on clients' user experience. And I was wondering if you can talk more about that now.
I mean, the user experience, it's really interesting. As much as it's changed, it hasn't. So we just did a huge, this was our first major portrait session. We did 20 some people, and this was a couple of weeks ago, and this had been postponed and postponed and postponed. I think people are looking for more genuine connection now. I think coming out on the other side of this, people have realized that either, I think the age of the influencer is over. I'm really hoping that the age of the influencer is over. I think people are looking for that connection. They're looking for that to be able to look somebody in the, first of all, be able to look somebody in the eye, and actually see their smile and all that stuff. But I think that they're looking for just honest. They're looking for genuine. They're looking for connection. And anybody that I've talked to with my clients, they're like, well, we're trying to figure out how do we want to pivot this, and we want to do something. We want to do fresh images on the site. And we're thinking more corporate photojournalism. I'm like, that's fine. I said, but let's look at this from a different perspective. Depending, and it depends on the industry, obviously, who we're serving at that point, whether it's lawyers or whether it's a nonprofit, you're going to angle the story a little bit differently. But I said, one of the things that you want to maybe really think about doing is some of your clients that have been vaccinated, that are safe and you feel comfortable, let's utilize them in the images. Let's start to pivot the narration or not the narration, the narrative. And let's start to come out of this where you're like, we're really focused on our clients. This is so-and-so has been part of our team for however long, or has been buying from us for however long. This is a little bit of their story. Like, start out just by sharing these stories because we all have them. Right. Everybody is coming out of this pandemic with their own journey, their own story of how they've made it, be it, from the top to the bottom to the middle and everywhere in between. Utilize that. It's there. And people want to share their stories, but more than that, they really want to start making connections with people. They want to start talking to people again in person, not on a screen.
Right.
The interesting thing is I hear a lot of people talking about whether or not they're going to go back to workspaces. I think people are kind of tired of working from home for right now. I think they would love to get back to some semblance of normal. It may not be the way that it looked before, but I think that's a storyline in itself, and it's one that I've had with a lot of our clients in the last month as we're starting to ramp up for late Q2, Q3, and Q4.
My brother-in-law works for a company that makes logistics software, and they've been doing very well during this
Yeah,
pandemic
tech
with
has been doing
logistics.
great. My wife works in tech.
Yes.
That that's the one industry that
Yeah.
really has not been hit.
Yeah. And for a while, everybody was home. And now they're allowing, I think it was 5 bodies, besides from the owner, 5 bodies into the office at any given time. You have to register to be one of the bodies in the office. And I think it's priority to anybody that has a physical office with a door versus a cubicle. Um, like the managers and salespeople have physical offices versus cubicles. So I think that's going to be a trend we're going to start seeing where there's going to be offices, but not everybody's going to be allowed in at once. It's going to be, at least in the beginning, it's going to be, I need to be there on this day. Let me sign up to be there on this day. Right.
It's
So
it's
that, I think
now it's
that's
it's
the
really
future.
been interesting. So up until 3 weeks ago, my wife worked for Adobe and had been there for a number of years. And the Adobe culture is very much like butts and seats. Some companies are like that. Some tech companies are like that. Some aren't. Adobe was amazing throughout all of this. I really have to hand it to them that they really took care of their entire workforce globally, and they're still not back in offices. And they've started having that conversation about whether or not they need the biggest mothership that they have out in San Jose right now, or any of this other stuff. Now, my wife just pivoted to a new company, which was actually the old company she worked for before Adobe. That's more local. She's been remote for 7 years, so like the pandemic really didn't hit her at all. What will be
Hmm.
weird for her is actually going back into an office setting when they do reopen, because they have an office outside of Philadelphia, and she will be going in, periodically, not every day, but periodically. That's going to be a huge shift for her, because for seven
Right.
years, outside of her travels overseas or out to San Jose, there wasn't a local office for her to go to. So she's constantly been working out. I'm very curious to see how people that have done that have been remote, that now all of a sudden may have gone into a new job where when the offices open back up, they're going to be around people. And that's a shift in itself.
Yeah. I've been with Imagely. May will be 9 years
Congratulations.
that I've been 100% remote every single day. So I it would be weird for me to go to an office. I could totally see how it's going to be an adjustment for your wife to
Yeah,
to to have to figure
I
that out.
joke around
It's going
like
to be weird.
I have a t-shirt that says "People, not a big fan," and I find it funny that a lot of photojournalists, a lot of different photographers, generally have some level of hatred for the Gen Pop, but that's our job, is to actually document the Gen Pop. So,
Mhm.
for me, I've had this last year off where I really haven't been interacting with too many people. And now that we're starting to ramp back up a little bit and we're starting to do some of these shoots, like the headshot session that we did a couple 3 weeks ago, it was weird because I didn't realize some of these people had never met because they had been hired during the pandemic. Some of these people hadn't seen each other in a year. And I never really thought about that dynamic of, like, it was really interesting to see how people reacted being around other people. Some were vaccinated, some weren't. We were masked up the entire time. Our makeup artist, who is amazing, like has this whole sanitation process that she does. And but it's been interesting to watch people interact and how they're doing that. And it's actually something that's intrigued me from just a documentary standpoint. We've been involved with a huge vaccination clinic here outside of Philadelphia, and we've been running media for them. And it's really interesting. For the last year, everyone's like, "Don't be around people. Don't be around people. Don't be around people." Well, on Sunday, we ran this clinic where 3,000 people got vaccinated. And the one thing that I would keep hearing out of people's mouths as I was walking around is like, it's just so weird to be around this many people,
Mm.
because we've been trained not to be. So there's gonna
Yep.
there's gonna be a huge, paradigm shift here coming in the next few months, and it's gonna be really interesting to see how that shakes out.
Yep. Yep. And as actually like the um one thing I always looked forward to in October was
Photo
uh
Expo,
Photo
yeah.
Plus Expo, right? And obviously that um didn't happen, I think. Yeah, it didn't happen in
Mhm.
October, right?
I think they
And
did some
then
kind of, they maybe pivoted to some virtual,
virtual.
but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that once these start happening again, it's going to be all or mostly hands-on outside things more than even in the cold. I think they're going to try to do more hands-on outside photo walks and workshops and stuff like that versus just a showroom, right? And having classes.
It's going to be interesting.
So
I'm very curious to see how the industry kind of works this. I was supposed to be
yeah,
one of the guest presenters at Focus on the Story last year in May, and they ended up going virtual. And I think mine just ended up getting cut entirely. I mean, they cut a lot of the stuff down, and my name doesn't rank nearly as high as some of the other people that were there. So I fully understood. But I'm very curious to see how like a WPPI or I forget what PPAs is
yeah.
called.
Professional
No.
photographers.
They're
Imaging.
Couldn't think of it.
Imaging. Yeah. Yeah.
I know the Northern Short went virtual again this year. I'm really curious to see how they pivot out of this. I really
Yeah.
want to know and how much it's going to affect, because Canon Expo should have been last year. Like we were at the
Right.
5-year mark. That should have been last year. I haven't heard hide nor hair about anything coming out of Canon on whether or not
Right.
they're going to try and
Yeah.
redo it for 21 or 22 and then restart the clock. It's going to be interesting. I think people are tired of virtual. I think people,
Yes.
and especially like, look, visual creators, we need life.
Yeah.
Doing I was talking about the food drive that we're a part of every year, and a lot of the guests that would normally be on site came in through Zoom. Can I tell you how much I had to by the end of the 5th day, I'm like, I can't make a Zoom call look any sexier than I already have. Like there was, is it, I forget the band is escaping me at the moment, but we had the lead singer on, and I got this great black and white shot. I was in the comm truck, and he was up on one screen, and then we had him on an iPhone on another, and I got this great shot. I'm like, that's it. I'm done. That was Wednesday. I'm like, there's no way I can make a Zoom shot look any better than this. Like there's just, I'm done. So it's going to be really, I don't know about the outdoor aspect. I think, photojournalists in general are a brave set. Everybody runs towards the danger, and I don't see that necessarily changing. So I'm curious to see what side of the line that comes down on.
Yeah. I don't, unless they space everything out big time and they limit the amount of people that are in the room, that giant room at the Expo Center. I don't.
You mean this year or moving forward ever after?
I mean this next one that's coming up, because they're planning on having
it.
Okay,
see, I hadn't heard about that. So all right, yeah.
Yeah. There was no details on it yet, but they're planning on it, so it'll be interesting. I don't know. So the last thing that you mentioned was working with up and coming photojournalists and other photographers. Can you talk about how you've been working with them to make them
so
prepared,
that's been our biggest pivot, is we're actually getting ready to launch course. My brain is not working. I was up really late last night. Chorus Consulting. And I've been doing this for a while. It's just something that I'm a big believer in. I like paying it forward. But and with college students and people right out of school, I do it all the time and I don't charge. But we've had more and more photojournalists that are transitioning out of the newsroom that are trying to figure out how to make, what their next steps look like. And we've helped many. For me, giving back has just always been part of my DNA makeup. Like it's always been a cornerstone of anything that I've tried to do. I had a difficult childhood through nobody's fault but my own. And it was one of those situations that ever since I've turned like 27, 28, I think I've just been trying to write the karmic ledger. Not that it was anything horrible, but in my head, it's just something that I've always tried to deal with. I just have always tried to give back. And I think it's just a matter of whether it's trying to play catch up for my youth or trying to just put some good back into a world that so desperately needs it. I love doing it. And so we've had a number when I was involved with NPPA in the Northern. Now that I'm involved with RTDNA, I think they have a mentorship program that I'm going to get involved with. It's just, there's more than enough business out there for everybody. And it's a small enough industry that we shouldn't be battling each other. We should actually be helping to lift each other up. And I've just tried to do a small part of that by helping them navigate, something as simple as setting up an LLC or figuring out quarterly taxes, or, maybe you don't want to call your photo studio out of your own name, because if you grow, and all of a sudden you become popular, everybody wants you and you're not going to have any work-life balance. Like simple things that they just don't teach you in college that are,
right.
years of experience have, either I've learned from somebody else or learned from mistakes more than anything else. And it's, I'm always thankful when somebody comes to me, because if I'm able to make even a small difference, then, it's a good day.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a very good thing. So I have two final
Okay.
questions for you on
Lightning
this
round.
on
Here
this
we go.
subject. What would you tell other photographers in your situation
Currently or in general? Like, okay.
right now? Yeah.
Network, talk to other photographers, talk to editors, talk to anybody that you can. Like, at this point, there is nothing wrong with, like, in the age of social media, it is so easy to get a hold of people sometimes. You don't know unless you try. It's that simple. If you don't put yourself out there, and I'll honestly use the Smithsonian as an example. I was at a loss a year ago, and I just didn't know what to do. So I did what I do. I grabbed my camera and I walked through my hometown, which was empty on St. Patrick's Day, and the bar was empty, the streets were empty. There was, that cliche movie, you hear a can being blown down the street by the wind. That stayed with me, and I just did what I did, and I went out and I made some images, and then there was an open call for submissions, and they chose 11 of us across the country. Did I know that was going to happen when I picked up my camera that night? No, I had absolutely no idea. If you don't, unless you make that choice to actively put yourself out there and just throw as much stuff up against the wall as possible, you don't know what's going to stick. And networking is the biggest part of that. For lack of a better term, don't be an ass to other people, especially in our industry. We're all trying to do the same thing. There's nothing worse than seeing some of these people that are just so incredibly cocky and condescending and everything. I try to make as many friends as possible, because I think, you never know when someone's expertise or someone's sense of humor or someone's eye is going to make a huge difference in your life. And unless you go up and actually introduce yourself to that person, talk to them, find out about them, but not just work stuff, find out about them as a person, you have absolutely nothing to lose. And I can tell you that has served our business well for 15 years, and luckily will continue to serve it for the foreseeable future.
Awesome. So my final question is there something that you do for your health mentally, physically, or a combination to cope with the stress that comes out of the pandemic? For me, what I've shared as an example in the past pivot and shift episodes is that I train even harder in karate, because it's an incredible combination of both the physical and the mental, stress relief.
I'm a cigar guy, so and it's a shame, because at our old studio, it was actually one of the things that really got us through the pandemic last year. Is we had this amazing. We were dead in the middle of town. We were across the street from my friend's brewery, and we had this great porch. And every afternoon, spring, summer, into fall, I would be out on the porch having a cigar, and all the locals that lived in town knew us. Everybody, knew our studio. We always had treats for the dogs and stuff like that. And it was great because you could connect and still socially distance. That was a big thing. Riding my bike had become a big thing. The biggest thing for me, honestly, and I'm going to pivot my camera over here, and I don't know if you can see, where is it? There it is. My wife and a ton of my friends got me a new electronic drum kit for my birthday a couple weeks ago, and you can kind of see it there in the corner. I haven't had a real kit in years, mostly because for me, I didn't want to have an acoustic kit because it would drive my wife insane. And honestly, I would have rather put the money towards new equipment or to upgrade the house or whatever. So they surprised me for my birthday, and I have news for you. I have sat behind that kit every day now for 2 weeks and just worked it out over an hour. And any stress that I had, any type of mental block that I had, or if I'd been editing too long, I sit down at that thing and I try to remember, some of my exercises and all that kind of stuff. Or sometimes I'll just put on the Eagles or Pink Floyd and just jam out and play, wrong notes or otherwise. I've also spent a lot of time. I started something, it was a year ago last Thursday, called the Fireside Chat, as a little nod to FDR. And we just celebrated a year the other night. And every night for the last year, we've either had as many as 20 or 25 people on the call, or we've had as few as 2. we'll continue to do it until we don't need it anymore. But that's been a huge thing for us, just as far as staying connected with people and trying to help people through really difficult situations. But the drumming and the cigars probably were my clutch go-tos in the last year. Yeah.
If you smoke cigars in the house, then you can do both
I'm not
at the
allowed to
same
do
time.
that. As a matter of fact, I have to take my clothes off in the mudroom as soon as I come home and leave them by the washer.
Nice.
That is. Although we moved into we did move into this house, and I have got a little bit of room to make like a small little smoking area for myself, and I'm trying to talk my wife into that right now. We'll see how that goes. But now that we're back into the gorgeous months, I can sit outside, or when I take the dog for a walk,
Right.
I'll do that. But yeah, and just connecting with people.
Awesome.
Talk with your friends, and your family.
Yeah. So thank you, BP, for joining us today. Can you tell the listeners the absolute best place to find more information
you can always
about you?
find out about us by going to chorusphotography.com. That's CHORUS. I'm on Instagram under Chorus Photography. I'm on Twitter under Chorus Photog. Not that anybody cares what a photojournalist thinks, but there we are. Facebook, LinkedIn, like all the and Clubhouse. I'm on Clubhouse. I'm still not entirely sure what it's doing, but it's I am on it. And if anybody needs an invitation, I've got about 8 sitting that I'm happy to send out. But yeah, and you can always just contact me through the website. That's the easiest way to get a hold of me. If you just have questions or you're kind of trying to figure something out, I'm always available. And especially right now, until we get probably into 2022, any people that are looking for like consulting time or anything like that, we're just not charging. So I'm happy to help anybody in any way that I can. We're all in it together.
Cool. Awesome. You can find the show notes and all the places to find BP at imagely.com/podcast/125. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, Google Play, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Until next time.
Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to the WordPress Photography Podcast. To listen to other episodes and to subscribe to the podcast via iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and more, please visit imagely.com/podcast.